I stood still, barely breathing, as my father raised his glass in front of 40 people, family members, business associates, distant cousins, and delivered the kind of toast that left no room for misunderstanding. "I'm proud of all my children," he said, pausing just long enough to make sure every eye in the room was on him. "Except the loser." There was a beat of silence. Then came the uncomfortable laughter, the kind people give when they're not sure if it's a joke or a personal attack. But I knew. I've always known. The loser was me. Emma, 34 years old, software engineer, living in Seattle. The daughter who never took over the family business, never cared about country clubs or Sunday brunch with clients, never dressed the way he thought a Matthews woman should, the one who left and built a life of her own. My brother Benjamin didn't flinch. His smile held, polished and prepared, just like his posture, just like the life he'd built on my father's blueprint. He had everything Dad admired: charm, status, the Matthews name running through his veins. Or so we thought. My mother didn't meet my eyes. She sat rigid, her napkin clenched tightly in her hand, looking down at her plate as if she could disappear into the porcelain. I didn't say anything, didn't make a scene. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a small wrapped box, the gift I'd spent weeks designing. A miniature replica of the company's first building, made with industrial-grade resin, etched with my father's name and the year he founded Matthews Construction. I walked up to his seat, placed it beside his untouched wine glass, and simply said, "Congratulations, Dad, well played." Then I turned around and walked out, through the grand hallway filled with family portraits, past aunts who couldn't meet my gaze, past cousins pretending to check their phones, and out the front door into the cool night air. Nobody followed me, not even my mother. The air felt sharp in my lungs, but it was the silence inside me that struck the hardest. I wasn't angry, I wasn't broken. I was done. Something in me had quietly snapped, not with violence, but with a kind of still, perfect finality. For 34 years, I had tried to prove myself worthy of love, of praise, of a place at the table. That night, I realized I never had a seat. I was always on the outside, always the odd one. The one he could publicly humiliate because he never really saw me as his. What I didn't know then was that my father's statement wasn't just cruel, it was ironic. Because soon, I would uncover the truth. A truth that had been buried for decades. A truth that would turn everything inside this family upside down. The golden son he adored wasn't even his, and the daughter he discarded was the only one who truly carried his blood. My name is Emma Matthews. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, though these days I live thousands of miles away in Seattle. I lead a development team at a healthcare tech firm, and most days I work late, drink too much coffee, and listen to ambient music while debugging other people's code. I like structure, I like logic, I like the quiet rhythm of creation, but none of those things ever made sense to the family I come from. My father, Edward Matthews, is the kind of man who measures worth in concrete and steel. He built Matthews Construction from nothing and made it into one of the most respected firms on the East Coast. He doesn't believe in luck. He believes in results, in legacy, in bloodlines, in tradition. He believes in the weight of a family name and in building something permanent that people can see, touch, and point to as proof of value. My mother, Deborah, comes from an old money family that taught her how to keep her voice down and her appearance perfect. She's graceful, quiet, and practiced in the art of saying a lot without ever stating how she feels. I've spent my life trying to guess whether she noticed the difference in how I was treated or whether she convinced herself it wasn't there. My brother Benjamin is 3 years older than me, and in every way that seemed to matter to my father, he was ideal. Captain of the lacrosse team, Yale graduate, married well, took over key contracts at the company by 28. He has a smile that makes people lean in and a confidence that says he was born for the center of the room. To my father, Benjamin was the future. I was the footnote. I wasn't rebellious or hostile, I was simply different. While Benjamin talked about profit margins, I coded databases. While he shadowed my father on construction sites, I built websites for my teachers. I took things apart to understand how they worked. I asked too many questions. I didn't wear the right dresses. I didn't go the right parties. I didn't care about appearances the way they did. I wanted something else. Freedom, clarity, something I could call mine. When I got into Stanford on a full ride, my father looked at the letter and said, "Well, it's not Ivy, but it'll do." When I graduated with honors, he said, "I guess you'll find a way to make this tech thing work." When I moved to Seattle and started my first job, no one asked what I was working on. I built my career from scratch, long nights, tight deadlines, and countless hours learning not just how to code, but how to lead. I've developed systems used in hospitals across the country. I've presented at national conferences. My name is on patents, but when I sent my parents the announcement of my team's national award, they never replied. At family gatherings, I'd arrive and be asked if I was still doing the computer thing. I'd nod and smile while the room erupted in congratulations for Benjamin closing another deal or expanding into another state. It wasn't just neglect. It was invisibility. I was always placed at the end of the table, next to the kids or the distant cousins. In family photos, I stood to the side, half smiling, while Benjamin stood centered, my father's arm proudly around him. At one Christmas dinner, a family friend asked which one of the sons I had married. When I said I was Edward's daughter, his eyebrows lifted slightly and he muttered, "Didn't know he had another one." That was the narrative. Benjamin was the legacy and I was the forgotten name in the margins. I kept showing up, I kept trying. I brought handmade gifts, offered to help the company digitize its systems, even volunteered to write a pitch for their client portal. Benjamin said he had someone in mind already. A month later, I found out they outsourced the work to a third party for 10 times the cost. When I mentioned it, no one responded. The silence was always louder than words. I stopped expecting praise. I stopped sharing my wins. I sent birthday gifts, got a group thank you text in return. I called on holidays and got updates in bullet points. When Benjamin's second child was born, I found out through Rebecca's Instagram. I clicked like and moved on. There's a kind of ache that doesn't sting, it just settles. It teaches you to manage your expectations down to nothing. I wasn't angry, at least not in the beginning. I just felt tired, unseen, unnecessary. But I kept attending the reunions, kept flying home, kept dressing in ways my mother would approve of. I smiled at strangers, nodded during toasts, stayed quiet when the conversation turned to real business. I knew my place. Until that night, until the reunion. Until the moment my father raised his glass, looked around the room full of people who had always known the roles by heart, and said the words I'll never forget. "I'm proud of all my children, except the loser." He didn't flinch, he didn't hesitate. He said it as easily as a man naming a weather forecast. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a joke. It was a confirmation of everything I'd spent my life suspecting. I wasn't just different. I didn't belong. But what none of them knew was that I was done accepting that story. That toast marked the end of something, but it also marked the beginning of a truth they couldn't control. Because the daughter he rejected, the one he erased, was the only one truly tied to him in the way that mattered. And once that truth came out, there'd be no turning back. I didn't always feel like the outsider. There was a time when I thought I belonged, when the distance between Benjamin and me was just a sibling rivalry, not a dividing line that would grow into something permanent. When we were kids, we used to ride our bikes through the half-built neighborhoods my father was developing. We'd race between steel frames and muddy lots, pretending we were explorers discovering a new world. Back then, we were just two children with scraped knees and wild imaginations. But even then, the difference was there. It just hadn't solidified into something permanent. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was 10. Benjamin had just finished a school project that involved building a model house. It was fine, messy in places. The roof was lopsided, but my father took one look and clapped him on the back like he just designed the Empire State Building. I had spent a week creating a fully functioning wind turbine using parts from a broken desk fan. I showed it to him with pride. He barely glanced at it before saying, "That's cute. Did you get help from your teacher?" From that point on, I began to measure everything through that lens. What would make him look up? What would make him proud? I entered science fairs, earned top grades, stayed out of trouble. But nothing I did ever seemed to cross the threshold from acceptable to admirable. Meanwhile, Benjamin could make mistakes and still be seen as a leader. When he totaled his first car at 17, my father replaced it within the month. When I chipped a taillight backing out of the driveway, I was grounded for a week. The rules were always different, the expectations always skewed. In college, the distance widened. I chose Stanford, thousands of miles away from everything familiar. I thought maybe if I achieved enough, if I'd built something that could be seen, measured, proven, I'd be able to come back and be treated like an equal. I didn't understand that the measuring stick was never mine to hold. After graduation, I offered to help the company modernize their systems. I pitched the idea with diagrams, data, projected savings. My father nodded slowly, then handed the proposal to Benjamin. A month later, they implemented a version of my idea through a consultant Benjamin had hired. I wasn't credited. I wasn't even informed. I found out through a company newsletter that they'd launched a new client portal, one I had wireframed myself. When I asked my mother about it, she said, "They probably forgot. You know how things move quickly there." I didn't argue. I just stopped offering ideas. I stopped believing there was room for me at the table. 5 years ago, during a financial downturn, the company faced a serious liquidity issue. A supplier pulled out and a major contract was delayed. Benjamin called me out of nowhere and asked if I could take a look at a few numbers. I did more than that. I created a custom internal system to streamline their accounts payable workflow, found redundancies, and flagged a billing error that had cost them over $200,000. I didn't charge them. I didn't even ask for acknowledgement. I just wanted to help. Weeks passed. The crisis smoothed over. My father gave a press interview thanking his brilliant son for handling the situation with maturity and leadership. I watched the video twice. My name wasn't mentioned. Benjamin never followed up. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just invisible. I was deliberately left out. Someone had to decide not to mention me. Someone had to choose silence. But I still didn't walk away, not completely. There was a quiet part of me, stubborn and hopeful, that believed I might still matter to them in a way that words couldn't erase. That maybe my mother would one day speak up. That maybe Benjamin, just once, would say, "That was Emma's work." But the silence held. It hardened into something permanent. Over time, my visits home felt more like layovers in a foreign country. I didn't understand the customs. I didn't speak the language. I'd brought gifts no one wanted. I answered questions no one really cared about. And every time I boarded a plane back to Seattle, I told myself it would be the last, that I'd finally learned, that I wouldn't put myself through it again. But I always came back. Until that night, until the family reunion, until the moment my father's words turned all my quiet pain into something sharp and public. In one sentence, he didn't just dismiss me, he announced it to the world. He made it official. And somehow, that hurt less than all the years of passive silence. At least now I knew where I stood. At least now I could stop pretending. But there's something else you need to understand. That night when I walked away from the table, I wasn't just walking away from my father. I was walking toward something else. I didn't know it yet, but the truth they had all kept hidden, was about to find me. And when it did, everything about the Matthews legacy would change. Because for all my father's obsession with bloodlines and inheritance, he never once stopped to ask the only question that mattered: who actually belonged in this family? And the answer, as it turned out, was not the person he'd spent his life preparing to inherit his name. It was the one he never truly claimed. The invitation arrived in the mail, thick paper with embossed gold lettering and the Matthews crest pressed at the top. A symbol that always felt more like a brand than a belonging. Matthews Family Celebration, it read, followed by the date, the venue, and a line that said business formal attire encouraged. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I knew exactly who was behind it. My father never let anything in the family happen without his blessing, especially not something like this. It had been over a year since I'd been home, and even then my last visit was brief, an obligatory Christmas Eve dinner where I sat mostly in silence while Benjamin and Rebecca shared photos of their new property in Charleston. I hadn't planned to attend the reunion, but then my mother called. Her voice was soft, careful. She never spoke plainly, but her meaning was always clear between the lines. "It would mean a lot to your father if you were there," she said. "He's getting older. We don't know how many more of these we'll have." I knew better than to think that sentence came from her. It had my father's logic all over it. Some in the family control the narrative, make it look like unity even when everything underneath is fractured. Still, I said I'd come. Some part of me still wanted to try, not for him, but for myself, to see if maybe with enough time and distance, something had shifted. I spent the next few days trying to decide what to bring. I wanted it to be thoughtful but neutral, not personal, not emotional. I eventually decided on a gift, a custom 3D printed replica of the very first commercial building my father had constructed back in 1982, the one that launched his empire. I had it designed in gray resin, etched with the original address and his name on the base. It was the kind of gift that spoke his language. Measurable, tangible, legacy-oriented. I arrived at the venue 15 minutes early just as staff were lighting candles and placing name cards. The event was held at one of the company's newly developed country club properties. Polished floors, high ceilings, walls lined with plaques commemorating Matthews Construction's milestones. There were already guests arriving, most of them familiar. Extended family, longtime business associates, board members, neighbors. Benjamin stood near the entrance, greeting people like a politician. He wore a navy suit and a smile that had never known hesitation. Rebecca was beside him, flawless as always, directing waitstaff where to place gift bags. My mother floated between groups like a ghost, smiling, nodding, touching arms lightly. And then there was my father, stationed at the head of the long dinner table, tall and still intimidating despite his age. His hair had thinned, but his voice hadn't. He called out greetings like he was conducting an orchestra. When he saw me, he gave a nod, barely enough to count as acknowledgement, and turned back to his conversation. I placed the gift box near his seat without comment and found my own place at the far end of the table. As the evening wore on, the event unfolded like every Matthews event did. Speeches, small talk, polished smiles. Benjamin was called up twice to speak, once to toast the family's legacy, once to share a few funny memories from childhood. He did both with practiced ease. People laughed, clapped, nodded in admiration. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Even when Benjamin shared a story that I had been part of, a summer trip to the lake when we were teens, he revised the memory to make it about him and our father. I watched, silent, while my mother sat 2 seats away and said nothing. I sipped my water. I counted the seconds. Then came the final toast. My father stood up, slowly, holding a glass of red wine. The room quieted instantly. He was never the warm, sentimental type, but his speeches always held weight. He cleared his throat and said, I want to thank everyone for coming. It's not often we get to gather like this and reflect on how far we've come. He scanned the room. I've built a lot of things in my life, buildings, contracts, companies, but nothing means more to me than family. People smiled, raised glasses. He continued, I look at my children, and I see the future of everything I've worked for. Benjamin, you've carried this family's name with strength and intelligence. You've stepped into the legacy I built and made it stronger. I couldn't be more proud. He turned slightly, eyes grazing past me, and then he said it. Without pause, without hesitation. I'm proud of all my children. Except the loser. The words fell like stone in water. A ripple of stunned silence moved across the table. Some people chuckled uncomfortably. Others shifted in their seats. My mother went completely still. Benjamin looked down at his plate. I didn't react. Not outwardly. My chest was tight, but my face didn't move. I reached down, picked up my bag, stood slowly. I walked to the head of the table, placed my hand gently on the gift I had brought, and slid it across the table toward him. Congratulations, Dad, I said. Well played. Then I turned, walked out of the room, and didn't look back. The room stayed silent behind me. No one followed, not even my mother. Outside, the air was cool against my skin. I stood for a moment, letting the quiet settle. I should have felt broken. I should have felt ashamed, but instead, I felt clear. For the first time, the line had been drawn with words, not just silence. And now that it had been spoken, I no longer had to pretend. What I didn't know then was that the real truth, the truth that had been hidden for decades, was about to rise. And it would begin with a single phone call. One that would force me to re-examine everything I thought I knew about my family, and about who I really was in it. 2 days after the reunion, I was back in Seattle, sitting at my kitchen counter with a cup of cold coffee I'd forgotten to drink. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Something about that weekend had left me exhausted in a way I couldn't explain, like a part of me had been surgically removed, and I was only now starting to notice the ache. But I picked up, expecting maybe a work call or a wrong number. Instead, it was Aunt Helen, my mother's older sister. We hadn't spoken in years. She lived in Connecticut and only came to big family events once in a while. She had a raspy voice and a sharp memory, the kind of woman who always remembered your birthday but never sent a card. "Emma," she said, after confirming it was me, "I've been thinking about you since the reunion." Her voice was cautious, like someone walking on thin ice. I stayed quiet, waiting. "What your father said. That was cruel and wrong. But I think you deserve to know something your mother never told you." I sat up straighter. My stomach tightened. She hesitated, then added, "It's about Benjamin." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, the kind that settles in a room like smoke. I asked, "What about him?" Helen sighed. "Years ago, before you were born, there were complications in your parents' marriage. Your mother had been seeing someone before she married your father. There were questions about whether Benjamin was truly Edward's son." I blinked, trying to piece it together. "You mean he might not be—" "He isn't," she said, with a certainty that made my skin prickle. "Your mother knew. Your father suspected, but they agreed not to talk about it. They buried it. Raised him as Edward's, kept the image intact. No one was ever supposed to know." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Why are you telling me this now?" Helen paused. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I watched you walk out of that room with more dignity than anyone in it, and because secrets don't stay buried forever. They just wait for the right person to unearth them." When we hung up, I didn't move. I stared at the kitchen counter, then slowly turned toward the drawer where I kept my old paperwork. A few months earlier, during a long weekend, I had ordered a genetic testing kit out of idle curiosity, partly because of health tracking, partly because I wanted to learn something about our ancestry. I'd forgotten about it entirely, but I still had the login. I pulled up the results, logged in, and saw the matches. Distant cousins, nothing unusual, until I filtered by immediate family. One name was missing. Benjamin. No match, no shared parent, nothing. My heart pounded, my chest felt hollow. I clicked the details 3 times, refreshed the page, opened a second tab, and ran it again. Still nothing. According to the data, Benjamin and I weren't biologically related. We didn't share a father. For a moment, the room felt unreal, like the air had changed density. And then, just as quickly, everything clicked into place. The favoritism, the rewriting of history, the silence when I brought up accomplishments, my father's coldness, my mother's distance. It wasn't just about who I was. It was about what I represented, the truth, the undeniable proof that their story wasn't as clean, as linear, as perfect as they wanted the world to believe. And maybe, deep down, my father had always known. Maybe that's why he held me at arm's length, because I was the one thing he couldn't deny, the child who carried his blood. The irony was bitter. For years, I had internalized the rejection as a reflection of my worth. I thought I wasn't enough, too different, too quiet, too independent, but the truth was, I was the only one who belonged, the only one who was truly his. The loser he dismissed at a public table was the heir he never acknowledged. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. It didn't rewrite the past, but it shifted something inside me. Something deep. It gave me clarity, power. For the first time, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was at the center of a truth they'd all tried to ignore.
I sat with it for a week before I called my mother. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Emma," she said, her voice a careful blend of polite and distant. "I was hoping we could talk." "We're going to," I replied, "but not the way you expect." I told her what I knew. I told her what I'd confirmed. At first, she was silent. Then, slowly, she began to cry. Not loud, not performative, just quiet tears that sounded like guilt. "I tried to protect you," she said. "I thought if we kept things simple, if we just pretended, it would be better for everyone." I interrupted. "Better for who?" She didn't answer. I didn't expect her to. The next day, I forwarded the genetic test results to her email with no message. 2 hours later, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in years, my father. I didn't answer. He called again the next day, left a voicemail that simply said, "We need to talk." But I didn't owe him anything, not anymore. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't planning anything really, just truth. And when the truth sits long enough in silence, it starts to echo. That echo would grow. It would reach boardrooms, inheritance discussions, reputation management teams. But for now, I just let it breathe. Because after a lifetime of being the forgotten one, I had become the storm on the horizon, quiet, certain, and impossible to ignore. In the weeks that followed, I said nothing to anyone. No dramatic confrontations, no angry emails, no public statements. Just silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any reply. I didn't call my father back. I didn't respond to my mother's Tulum follow-up email. We should all sit down and talk this through. There was nothing to talk through. The conversation they'd avoided for decades had already spoken for itself. I wasn't going to give them a stage to spin the story one more time. I wasn't going to participate in the performance. But I did start making notes. Not revenge, just facts. Quiet, undeniable, well-documented facts. I still had my old design proposal from 5 years ago, the one they used without credit. I still had the emails between Benjamin and the IT consultant discussing my initial concepts. I had receipts from the early work I did during their liquidity crisis. I compiled it all organized and clean and tucked it away in a private folder labeled simply Legacy. I didn't know exactly what I would do with it, but something told me I'd need it, not to fight them, to free myself from them. I got back to work, slowly. My team noticed I was quieter than usual, more focused, more exacting. I wasn't cold, just resolved. There's a kind of clarity that comes from being betrayed so cleanly. You stop needing things, apologies, explanations, approval. You start to see exactly how small the world is when it's built on control. Meanwhile, the Matthews family carried on. My father posted a photo on LinkedIn from the reunion, standing next to Benjamin and two city councilmen, with the caption, "Proud of our legacy and our future." My name wasn't tagged. Of course it wasn't. But now the omission felt less like an insult and more like a tell-proof, that the story had to be curated to survive. A few weeks later, I got a message from a woman named Jillian, a mid-level analyst at Matthews Construction. She was young, sharp, and someone I'd met once at a family holiday party. Her message was simple. "Hi, Emma. I know this is out of the blue, but I think you should see something. Can we talk?" I agreed. We met virtually that evening, and what she showed me wasn't surprising, just confirming. Internal memos about containing reputation risk, legal consultations marked confidential with terms like paternity exposure, succession restructuring, and mitigation strategy. My father knew, maybe not the full extent, but enough to panic, enough to start preparing for damage control. Jillian was discreet. She didn't ask questions. She didn't want anything in return. She just said, "I thought you deserved to know what they're trying to protect." That night, I pulled up my folder, Legacy. I added the screenshots. I added my DNA results. I added a copy of the company's latest shareholder structure. I wasn't going to leak anything, but I wanted to know that if I ever did choose to speak, the story would be ready, clean, precise, undeniable. I didn't need the world to know the truth right now. I just needed them to know I wasn't powerless. That's the thing no one ever saw in me, not even my parents. They thought distance meant indifference, but I see everything. I remember everything, and I never forget what people try to hide. Benjamin sent a message 3 weeks later. "I think we should talk. The situation has gotten complicated." No apology, no explanation, just a vague, glossy reach out like a man trying to patch a PR problem. I left it on read. 1 week after that, I got a legal letter. Polite, formal, but unmistakably threatening. From the Matthews legal team, a non-disclosure reminder, a reference to family proprietary matters. Subtle language designed to intimidate. I read it once and forwarded it to my own attorney. She laughed. "They're rattled," she said. They're trying to scare you into silence. They don't need to, I said. I've been silent my whole life. I'm just not obedient anymore. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't need to. I knew something they didn't. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's just stage setting. My lawyer advised me to document everything I already had in triplicate. Then she asked if I wanted to go public. I said no. Not yet. Not out of fear, but out of precision. I wasn't here to torch a name. I was here to reclaim my own. I started taking steps, not aggressive, just undeniable. I applied for a patent correction on the medical data system I helped build with Matthews Construction's short-term use. I updated my public portfolio. I began drafting an op-ed about legacy and invisible daughters, not by name, but by truth. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate in their circles, discreet, careful, just whispers about DNA tests, about succession, about legitimacy. No one asked me directly, but I saw the signs. LinkedIn profile views from corporate PR firms, silent updates on family bios, small adjustments in language, longtime family friend, mentored into the business, next-gen leader, terms that softened Benjamin's positioning without exposing the truth. And that's when I knew I had already won, not with revenge, with pressure. I had become a variable they couldn't control, a truth they couldn't edit, and they were doing what all legacy-driven people do when faced with instability: recalibrate quietly. But for me, it wasn't about leverage anymore. It was about peace. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was proving anything. I wasn't knocking on a door hoping to be let in. I wasn't chasing praise from a man who never truly saw me. I was simply standing fully, without apology, without permission, and they couldn't ignore that. I didn't want a seat at their table anymore. I had built my own, and the silence I carried wasn't their victory, it was mine. 6 months passed. In that time, I didn't hear from my father again. No calls, no messages, no third-hand requests to meet over coffee just to clear the air. It was as if my silence had drawn a boundary he didn't know how to cross, or maybe one he never intended to. My mother sent one handwritten letter, postmarked quietly with no return address. Inside were 4 lines, written in her looping, delicate script. I know the truth is out now. I hope one day you'll understand why I stayed silent. I thought I was protecting everyone. Maybe I was just protecting myself. Mom. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, not out of malice, just because I didn't know what to do with it yet. That was the theme of that season in my life. Not pain, not anger, but adjustment. I had spent so long orbiting a family narrative I didn't write that when I finally stepped out of it, I had to relearn how to stand still. I worked, I rebuilt, I hired 2 new engineers. I launched a new product. My company grew quietly, steadily, without fanfare. I started to mentor younger women in tech, women like I had been at 22, full of skill but still waiting for someone to tell them they were enough. I told them early, you don't have to earn your place in someone else's story. You get to write your own. That became the quiet philosophy of everything I did moving forward. No more chasing invitations, no more asking for seats at someone else's table. I wasn't interested in proving I belonged to myself now. But the Matthews name, as much as I had tried to untangle myself from it, still followed me like a shadow. I began to hear murmurs at conferences, on industry forums, in private chats. People asking if I was the same Matthews as the construction firm. Some asked out of curiosity, some with raised eyebrows. I never offered more than a smile and a shrug. Let them wonder. It was better that way. Mystery held more power than defense. But it made me think. For years, I had distanced myself from the Matthews brand because I didn't feel welcome under it. But now, I saw the truth. The name wasn't the problem. The people trying to control it were. I still had the name. And now I had the freedom to define it for myself. That realization birthed something I hadn't expected. The idea to start something new. Not a rebellion, a legacy. My legacy? I filed paperwork for a new company, Matthews Insight, a consultancy that specialized in helping companies transition from analog to digital systems, what my father's company had once refused to let me do. This time, I didn't ask permission. I didn't pitch it to anyone. I just built it. My first few clients came from referrals, startups who wanted structure without bureaucracy. Then came mid-size firms, then 2 government contracts. Within 5 months, we had 6 full-time staff and a wait list. One of our biggest contracts came from a developer in Richmond. They didn't even realize the connection until the 3rd meeting. When the project closed, the client asked jokingly, "Any relation to the other Matthews?" I smiled. "Distant," I said. It wasn't a lie. What happened next wasn't dramatic. There were no court battles, no headlines, no tell-all interviews, just momentum. Quiet, undeniable momentum. And that's what unnerved them the most, I think. The idea that I didn't need their approval or their attention or their inheritance, that I had become something on my own and I wasn't looking back. One day, months later, I received a thin envelope in the mail. Inside was a revised version of my father's will. Clean, formal, legal. Benjamin was still the primary beneficiary of the business, but the language had changed. It was now Benjamin Anderson Matthews, a subtle but notable shift, acknowledgement that his identity had been clarified, if not publicly, then at least legally. There was also an addendum. A clause naming me as the sole inheritor of a private trust my grandfather had left untouched for decades. No note, no explanation, just a line and a signature. I wasn't sure what to feel. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't apology. It was just adjustment, realignment. I didn't touch the trust. I left it where it was. I didn't need it to build what I was building, but I kept the letter, not as proof of change, but as a marker of how far I had come without it. My father never spoke to me again, not directly, not through my mother, not even through lawyers. He receded from my life like a tide that had finally given up trying to wash me out, and in his absence, I found something I never expected: peace. Not perfection, not justice, just the absence of needing anything more from him. And maybe that's the most powerful piece of all. I spent that year slowly, deliberately growing into my own name, not the one he built, the one I rebuilt from silence, from being overlooked, from being erased. Matthew's insight expanded. I hired Benjamin's former assistant. She was brilliant, underappreciated. I paid her double what she used to make. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. One day, while reviewing contracts, she looked up and said, "You know, he used to call you the invisible one." I smiled. He won't anymore. And he didn't. No one did. Because I was no longer a shadow on the edge of someone else's spotlight. I was the architect of my own foundation. No one could take it from me. Because no one gave it to me. I earned it on my own terms. A year after the reunion, I stood at the edge of a construction site in downtown Seattle, watching workers break ground on a new tech innovation hub that Matthews Insight had helped plan. It wasn't flashy. It didn't bear my name in big gold letters, but every piece of it had passed through my hands: designs, budgets, digital infrastructure. I watched a steel beam swing into place and felt something I hadn't known I was missing. Not pride, not triumph, just stillness. The kind of quiet that settles after a long storm. I didn't think about my father much anymore, not out of bitterness, but because there was nothing left unresolved in me. I had told my story in my way. I had lived it. That was enough. And yet, on certain mornings, he would drift through my thoughts. Not as a figure of anger, but as a man whose own limitations had shaped so many lives around him. I no longer saw him as a villain. I saw him as a person who made a choice and then spent his life defending it. Maybe that's all legacy really is, the echo of our choices. He chose silence, he chose image. He chose the story that looked good over the one that was true. I chose differently. I chose to break the story open and write a new one. And for the first time, I was no longer carrying it alone. My team grew, our company expanded into 3 more states. I started doing guest lectures at universities. People began to ask about my leadership philosophy. I told them the truth. You don't need to dominate a room to lead one. You just need to stand without fear of being unseen. My story spread, not in headlines, but in conversations. Colleagues shared it quietly. Young professionals sent me emails saying thank you. Women told me they left jobs where they felt invisible because they realized invisibility isn't their fault. It's a decision made by others, and decisions can be outlived. I never told the full story publicly. I never outed Benjamin, never released the documents, never gave interviews. That would have made me like them, clinging to image, using truth like a weapon. I didn't need that. I had peace. That was enough. One afternoon, I got a call from Rebecca, Benjamin's wife. I hadn't heard from her in years. Her voice was steady but quiet. I don't expect you to answer, she said. I just wanted to tell you that I know about everything, and I'm sorry for the way we treated you. I listened. I said, thank you. We didn't speak again. That's the thing about closure. It doesn't always come with a bow. Sometimes it comes in fragments, in phone calls and changed tones. Sometimes it doesn't come at all, but you still keep walking. You build anyway. A few months later, I went back to Richmond, not for family, for work. We were consulting on a municipal redevelopment project. The office they gave me overlooked the old Matthews Tower. I stood at the window one morning, looking out over the city I'd left behind. So much of it still looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. I visited the park where Benjamin and I used to ride bikes. I drove past the school where I built my first science project. I stood on the sidewalk outside the original Matthews construction headquarters, now under renovation. No one recognized me. I liked it that way. Before I flew home, I stopped by my parents' house. The lawn was trimmed, the porch looked smaller than I remembered. My mother came to the door, slowly, holding a teacup, wearing the same kind of soft smile she always wore. I didn't expect you, she said. I didn't come for you, I replied. I came to say goodbye. She nodded like she had been waiting for that. We stood there for a moment, neither of us needing to say more. Then I turned and walked away, not angry, not broken, just finished. I never saw my father again. He passed away quietly 8 months later. There was a memorial, private, elegant, filled with business associates and a polished tribute video. I didn't attend, but I sent a wreath. White lilies, his favorite. The card said, "Thank you for the name. I've made it my own." After that, I never heard from Benjamin again. I didn't need to. He had his story, I had mine. I didn't need him to know mine was better, not because it was louder or richer or more accepted, but because it was true. In the end, I had learned something simple and unshakable. Family isn't blood. It isn't legacy. It isn't inheritance or last names or photographs in frames. Family is who sees you when you have nothing to prove, who claps when you're not on a stage, who stays even when there's no benefit. And sometimes you don't find that in the people who raised you. Sometimes you build it from scratch, brick by brick, quietly, fiercely, unapologetically. My name is Emma Matthews, and I am not the loser. I am the one who survived the silence, rewrote the story, and stood exactly where I was meant to be, not behind, not beneath, but whole. That's my legacy, and no one can take it from me. I didn't write an email. I didn't make a call. I sent a box, simple, unadorned, delivered directly to the Matthews estate. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence printed in bold. Some truths require you to start over. No greeting, no explanation. Just that. Beneath it were 3 things. a miniature 3D model of the Matthews headquarters I had designed months ago, perfectly detailed and engraved with Edward G. Matthews' name on its base. A printed DNA report notarized with the line, paternity, not a biological match, underlined in red, and a printed email dated 2018 from Benjamin to my father, reading, Emma helped code this. If it works, feel free to credit me. 3 items. No commentary, nothing else. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't a plea. It was a mirror. I expected no response and I feared none. The next day, I exited a client meeting in downtown Bellevue and saw her, my mother, standing near my car, coat buttoned, face pale. She didn't wave. I unlocked the door, she got in, and I drove without a word. We ended up in a quiet cafe tucked away in Queen Anne. She ordered mint tea. I ordered nothing. When the server left, she looked at me directly. You know now. I nodded. Why? I asked, my tone flat. Her hands wrapped around her cup like it was the only thing grounding her. Because Benjamin was all I had left of who I used to be, she said, before Edward, before the name, before the image. I was scared. Your father demanded a test in 2004. I switched the sample. I used your hair instead. He believed it. I stayed silent, letting the weight of it settle. And you let him pour everything into Benjamin. She nodded slowly. I thought I was preserving something, but really I was just running from the truth. He chose Benjamin because Benjamin played the part. He needed a perfect son, not a real one. You were never predictable. You were real. And real scared him. My voice didn't rise. I didn't shake. So you both built a kingdom on a lie and silenced the only person who had nothing to hide. She looked down. Yes. There was no defense. No attempt to soften it, just quiet resignation. He always saw strength in obedience. You showed him strength without asking for permission. He didn't know how to handle that. I stood. You don't owe me more words, I said, but you do owe yourself the truth. We walked out together, no hugs, no promises, just a shared silence, no longer filled with denial. That night, I returned to my apartment and found an envelope under the door. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. I opened it, already knowing. Inside was a letter. Emma, you were never easy to understand. You didn't seek approval. You didn't adapt to expectations. You didn't fold. That terrified me. I built my world on predictability. Benjamin gave me that. Or at least, I thought he did. I knew the truth. About him, about you, I've known for a long time. But pride is a heavy thing. I convinced myself that legacy mattered more than blood, that optics were worth more than truth. But legacy isn't built through illusion. It's built through integrity, and I erased yours. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know something now, plainly, without conditions. You are the only person who gave the Matthews name meaning. And yes, this time I am proud. No signature, just the letter, just my name scrawled across the front of the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I folded the paper, placed it into my drawer, and sat still for a long time, listening to the hum of the city outside my window. The noise felt far away, like it couldn't touch me anymore. It wasn't closure. It wasn't redemption. It was just finally being seen. And even if it came too late, even if it came from someone incapable of giving it without condition before, it didn't matter because I had already chosen to believe in my own worth. The letter didn't change who I was. It only confirmed what I had already become. 3 months later, I stood across the street from the construction site where it had all begun. The Matthews Tower had been torn down last winter. In its place, a new structure was rising. Sleek, efficient, nothing flashy. The kind of building that doesn't shout, but lasts. Matthews' insight was overseeing the digital systems for the entire development. The irony wasn't lost on me. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. I hadn't plastered my name on any sign. There was no press release linking me to the project. I didn't need the credit. I had the ownership. The launch day came in early spring. The city sent a ribbon cutting team. Journalists showed up. Industry leaders came for networking. I wore a dark blue blazer, understated heels, no logo pin. I didn't need one. One of the speakers, a senior urban planner, referred to the project as a blueprint for adaptive legacy. He didn't know how precisely that phrase fit. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, I saw him, Benjamin, standing alone under a tree near the entrance. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. His eyes didn't carry defiance, just something far more unfamiliar on him, uncertainty. I didn't walk over. I didn't wave. He didn't call me. He just stood there, watched me from a distance, and then turned and walked away. That was our closure. A silent acknowledgement that the story had changed, and we both knew it. Later that evening, I returned to the empty office space, dimly lit by the ambient glow of the lobby lights. I walked the floors alone, letting my footsteps echo in a place built on quiet resolve. No plaques, no portraits, no slogans, just systems designed to serve, to function, to outlast noise. I sat down on a bench by the west-facing window, watching the last light fade over the city. I thought about the version of myself from a year ago, the one who still thought approval could be earned by trying harder. That girl would have stayed at the dinner table. That girl would have swallowed the insult. That girl would have clung to the hope that if she just gave enough, one day someone would see her. She was gone now. In her place was someone quieter, but stronger, someone who didn't need to be chosen to choose herself. A week later, I received one final letter, not typed, not formal, from my mother. The handwriting was softer this time. She wrote, "He left something for you." Something I didn't find until after. It's in the library, second drawer, right side. She didn't elaborate. No emotion, just instruction. I waited 3 days before deciding to go. The house was unchanged, still pristine, still curated, but the air felt lighter, like the weight of unspoken truths had finally been exhaled. I walked to the library, opened the drawer. Inside was a small notebook. Leather-bound, weathered. My name was written on the first page. It wasn't a diary, it was a journal of observations, notes. My father had written entries over years, short clipped phrases. Emma corrected the engineer's estimate. She was right. E designed the backup system. Works better than the original. Saw her lead client call. Confident. No dates, no sentiment, just recognition. Quiet, private, hidden recognition. I sat on the floor, notebook in hand, and let myself feel it. Not grief, not even closure, but the strange, warm ache of being witnessed too late. It didn't make up for anything, but it made sense of everything, and that mattered more. I took the notebook, left the rest. In the months that followed, I didn't talk much about the past. I worked, I mentored, I taught. I watched other women step into rooms they once thought weren't built for them. And I told them, you don't have to be anyone's legacy. You can build your own. That became the quiet theme of my life. Not a lesson printed on mugs or wall art, just something I lived. At Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner for my team. 10 people around a table I bought with my first major project bonus. No one asked about my father. No one needed to. We talked about code, market shifts, bad dates, good books. After dessert, one of the interns asked, "Emma, do you ever wish you had just stayed in the family company and taken over?" I smiled. No, because if I had, I wouldn't have built this. I gestured to the room, not the walls, not the furniture, the people, the culture, the dignity. Legacy, I had learned, isn't what you leave behind in buildings or names on signs. It's how people feel when they work beside you, how they remember the way you treated them, how your presence gives them permission to believe in themselves. That was what I inherited, not through blood, but through choice, not because I was allowed to, because I decided to. My name is Emma Matthews, not because someone gave it to me, but because I took it, shaped it, and gave it meaning. And for the first time in my life, I don't want anyone else's pride. I have my own.